Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Thunderball. Thunderball is directed by Terrence Young and stars Sean Connery, Claudine Auer, Adolfo Celli, Luciano Paluzzi, Bernard Lee, and Louis Maxwell. So the story is basically about Emilio Largo kind of like hijacks these two atomic bombs, and James Bond is kind of assigned to Nassau, Bahamas, basically, to try and retrieve them back and kind of stop Emilio Largo from going any further with his plans. So the story is really good. I mean, it's kind of basic like the other kind of films it was, but I think they do a pretty good job with it. I mean, I do like how they kind of do this whole atomic bomb thing. Like how Emilio Largo kind of like hijacks it, and it just has a pretty good plan of it, and Bond like kind of is informed and kind of like knows it, and is assigned to it, and it's just really kind of interesting how they have him kind of just have to try and stop him from going any further. I mean, I just really like how they end up doing it. It's just a really kind of interesting way, especially since they kind of like keep you into this type of stories, like reading basic with how like they kind of have Emilio Largo kind of like be a bit smarter than like other villains, just because like you can definitely see them Bond's having a tougher time with this, and it's just really a good way to kind of like keep you into it, and it's just really kind of interesting how they end up bringing this out like that. The whole structure behind the story is really good. I mean, I really like the first step. I mean, it kind of starts out, Emilio Largo kind of has this whole plan behind and hijacking these two atomic bombs. And it's a really good way kind of introduce you to it, and also like whole thing with Bond. I mean, it definitely does introduce you in quite an interesting way to him. I mean, it shows him fighting one guy, and then they have, like, at the end of the fight, kind of, like, jump off the jetpack, which is, like, just kind of silly and just kind of a funny way, if I'm being honest. So that's kind of, like, introduced Bond. I mean, it's definitely kind of, like, introduced him into the story in quite an interesting way, to say the least. I mean, it's just really kind of different to kind of show that for an open scene. It's just really comes off as silly and not that it's bad. It is silly in a good way. I mean, it's just really kind of an interesting way to introduce our main character into this movie, and it just makes it kind of hilarious way, and it just really shows how he's kind of smart, really. Then you got the second act, which kind of shows Bond kind of like assigned to this new thing where he has to go to the Bahamas to kind of like stop Largo, and it's just pretty interesting how it goes. And these all double agents on high alert, and it's just a good way to kind of break into that second act right there. I mean, it's just a good way to kind of do that, and it's just really kind of interesting how they do that. You know, like it's a good way to break right into that second act. I mean, it introduces you right to the kind of point of the second act, and it just makes sense. And then they kind of go and show like his whole plan, everything kind of like it's with Largo, and as well as just kind of talking with Donald, trying to like convince them to get on his side. And it's just really kind of interesting how they do that. I mean, I really think that the second act just really kind of gets you into it, and it's just really just this whole plan thing of Bond just really works out in bench, and it just really kind of like keeps you invested with it. And it kind of breaks into that third act, kind of having Bond tell Domino about what Largo did to Ruther, and they kind of have them team up in the climax. They kind of, and like search Largo's ship, and kind of it's really kind of is interesting. It's a pretty engaging climax, and the shows like trying to search him, try to get the Bond, and then it kind of doesn't that, and then he kind of like tries to figure out where the bombs were, and then kind of like gets on and like fights Largo for a bit, and then it's just like that Largo is onto it a bit with Donna, and they fight each other on the deck. Bond almost loses before Dano ends up killing Largo in revenge, which totally makes sense with the story, and then they kind of like flee it, where the film ends up ending, which is like a pretty satisfying ending. I mean, they do a good job wrapping the movie up, and just an overall really good way to end it, and it's just an overall really good third act. The pacing is mostly good. It does mostly keep you engaged inside the first and third act. At times they're insane, and it mostly keeps you into it. I'd say it's pretty good for the most part. The action, like the previous films, is quite silly, but it does work for its time, and I do think it mostly makes sense for what it's kind of doing. I mean, I think that it looks pretty good, and for the time, and it's probably what they can do. I mean, it's pretty silly, like I said earlier. The whole fight that he had, and then ended up escaping with a jetpack, which is kind of funny. I mean, it's just really kind of entertaining before then. They're fighting, going through it, and then he just escapes with a jetpack, being kind of silly and just really funny. I mean, it's just a pretty interestingly choreographed kind of action scene, and then there's like how there's kind of a scene where he's kind of like swimming away from a shark, and just the whole climax really is just really kind of engaging, and it does kind of like keep you into it. James Bond is a really good character. They really do show a lot of progression with him just as the kind of mission goes on. He just really kind of tries his hardest to kind of complete it, and it just really kind of gets you into the character, and I really think they do a good job with that, especially since they kind of have James Bond kind of like go in and kind of like outsmart him, but even with like Largo, like being pretty smart, he still kind of like outsmarts him. A lot of things like how, like with the shark, the way he kind of like he gets to go away. Yeah, it's just a really smart way to kind of do that and escape like a place that he was trapped under, like the whole pool area that he was trapped under. And it just really shows how smart he is and just how determined he is just to complete a mission. It really just gets you really kind of invested into the James Bond character with all these kind of like new things that he kind of uses, especially since, like I said earlier, he was like that kind of jetpack is a new kind of gadget, and like all these gadgets that he uses. I mean, they just really kind of keep him as an interesting character as he progresses throughout this franchise, especially in this movie. Domino is a rather interesting kind of Bond girl. I mean, not necessarily like 100% like normal. I mean, it's kind of more like towards the villain at first, but it does kind of like change sides after you kind of learned more about what exactly Largo did to her brother, and it's just really kind of interesting and ends up kind of like helping Bonnie again. It's just really kind of a good kind of progression and makes sense, and she even kind of like gets to and she's the one who kind of kills Largo, and that totally makes sense. I mean, because she kind of wants to fulfill her brother, so it makes sense for her to be the one to kill Largo, and it's just a pretty smart move there, as they do a pretty good job with her character, kind of like progressing her more. They kind of like become like one kind of with Bond. Emilio Largo is a really good villain. He's just really smart with his plans and how he kind of steals these atomic bombs, and it's just he's really smart with his plans, especially when he's like trying to kind of like stop Bond from like kind of completing his mission and like kind of he just kind of tries those where I mean he knows what Bond's doing most of the time, and it's a really good. I mean, he just nearly beats Bond on like many occasions, and he's really intimidating that, as he's really good at like coming up with schemes, and he is a pretty smart villain, and overall like comes on as a great villain for this movie and this franchise as a whole. The acting is really good. Once again, Sean Connery does a really good job as James Bond, as he just feels really confident. He definitely looks like he really likes the James Bond role. I mean, he's just really into it. This is the fourth movie in a row, and he really seems into it. And then there's Claudia Niger playing Domino, does a pretty good job, as she just feels confident most of the time. And there's Adolfo, so he as Emilio Largo, just really kind of feeling with the character, just giving a really confident kind of delivery in his lines, just really feeling like the character, and just really kind of like feeling intimidating like a villain, and just really kind of coming off that way. The cinematography is really good. They do a good job kind of using the kind of close-ups to expand it a lot, just really kind of showing the character's emotions, and they do a really good job with that, and it's kind of showing the overview of scenes a lot, and it's really kind of keeps you in it. And there's also the lighting that is pretty good. I mean, when it's at night, you can see what's going on, and I think that they use it to its advantage to really kind of like show off the kind of things, and it just really works for it, as you can really see what's going on, and they use enough of it. And then there's also the editing that is really good. I mean, it comes from one shot to another It just really feels smooth, and then when it like breaks into another scene, it just feels like a smooth transition to that scene, and they do a pretty good job with that most of the time, and just really a good job with most of the ending of this movie. Set designs are really good. I like the whole looks of the Bahamas, and especially like the whole part, like in Largo scene, like the whole thing with the shark thing. Like I like the way this design really feels like, and they do a really good job with that specifically, and just that whole meeting room and all the double agents kind of like go into. That's pretty good, and I just really like the way they designed this, and I feel like they do a really good job, like kind of making it feel like a normal kind of like and all this, like really kind of like feeling like sending in the one. I think they do a good job with that most of the time, and just really doing a good job with each set design, really. Then the score is really good, just the whole theme, Thunderball, it really works for the movie. It just really kind of describes James Bond's character, and I think they do a good job kind of like describing that, as it kind of works for this, as you can really just show that James Bond's character in this movie, obviously, and it really does show a lot on the movie. It's a lot more, it seems like, and it just really works because it just describes James Bond's character, and I think that it was pretty fitting mostly for the movie. And there's score in general that just really kind of like makes you get into the scenes and they're in, and it really fits the background of them. With that said, I do have a few negatives. Like the story, I will say, it can be a little flawed at times, and it does kind of drag at times, which does kind of get into the structure bit in the second act. Specifically, I do feel like there are a few scenes that probably could have been taken out, as it does drag a bit at times during the second act, and it also kind of goes into pacing a bit, as it does kind of feel like it drags just a little bit in the second act. Just definitely could have been a little shorter maybe, and it just really kind of feels like that some of it could have been cut, and just really just drags a little bit. And other than that, there really isn't really much else I can really say about the story structure and pacing that's really negative. And then there are a few shots from the cinematography that I will say are definitely not the best. I mean, there are a few scenes like in a couple of action scenes like them, and I will say that I really think that they didn't really work that well. I mean, it just really felt like that sometimes the camera was a bit too far away from like the thing, and it just really just feels like they could have done a better job to like kind of work for certain moments, and it just kind of feels like that it's as well as there are a few choppy editing in the action scenes, but other than that, I really don't have anything else to really say. So overall, Thunderball may not be as good as the last three entries, but it's still a really great movie, so I'm going to give Thunderball an 8 out of 10. That was my review of Thunderball. What are your thoughts on Thunderball? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.